I still remember that morning clear as day, the sun already high and merciless, pouring gold and heat over the dry plains. My boots were coated in dust, my shirt stuck to my back, and I kept telling myself the market couldn't be much farther. The dirt road wound like a lazy snake across the valley, the kind that looked shorter than it really was. I had a small bag slung over my shoulder and a half-empty canteen that clinked with every step. It had been only a week since I'd come to this part of Texas, hoping to find work on one of the ranches. Folks at the post office told me the Saturday market in town was the best place to ask around. So I'd started walking early, before the heat hit full force, but by noon I was regretting my optimism. That's when I heard the sound of hooves. Slow, steady, rhythmic, not the rush of a stagecoach or the scatter of cattle. Just one horse. I turned, squinting through the sunlight, and saw him. He rode tall in the saddle, a man well past his prime but strong as an old oak. His hat shaded his face, but I caught a glimpse of gray at his temples and eyes that seemed to look right through the distance. The horse beneath him was chestnut brown, calm and sure-footed. "You lookin' to walk the whole county, son?" he called out, voice rough but not unkind. I gave a small laugh, trying not to sound as tired as I felt. "Just headin' to the market, sir. Thought I'd catch a ride if someone passed by." He slowed his horse to a stop beside me, the dust curling around his boots as he leaned forward slightly. "Market's still a good 10 miles off. You'll be halfway to heatstroke by then." I shrugged, smiling. "I've had worse days." "Maybe so," he said, studying me a little. "Still ain't right lettin' a young fella fry out here." He reached down and offered a hand. His palm was broad and rough, the kind of hand that told stories all on its own. I hesitated for just a heartbeat, then took it. He pulled me up behind him with surprising ease. "Name's Eli," he said. "Sam," I answered, trying to balance behind him on the saddle. He nodded. "Well, Sam, market'll keep till next week. My ranch is closer. You can cool off, get a meal. Then I'll see about talking you into town proper." I started to protest. It didn't feel right intruding on a stranger, but his tone left little room for argument. It wasn't a command exactly, more like quiet certainty, the kind that made you feel you could trust him without knowing why. We rode in silence for a while. The prairie stretched endless and golden on both sides, the horizon shimmering in the heat. I watched the way Eli guided his horse, calm, patient, like he was part of the land itself. Every so often, he'd glance back to make sure I hadn't slipped, his mouth twitching into a small smile when he caught me looking. "You from around here?" he asked finally. "No, sir. From back east. Been travelin' a bit looking for work." He nodded, his eyes narrowing on the distance. "Work's easy to find if you ain't afraid to sweat. Good hands are rare these days." There was something thoughtful in his voice, not just words but a quiet weight behind them. After another half hour, the landscape changed. The wide plains broke into soft rolling hills, and soon, I saw a ranch come into view. A small wooden house stood near a windmill, with a barn and corral not far off. The whole place had a kind of stillness that felt alive, like it was breathing with the wind. "This your place?" I asked. He nodded once. "Been mine near 30 years. Built most of it myself." He dismounted first, his boots landing in the dirt with a thud. When I slid down, he steadied me with one hand at my arm, firm but gentle. "Come on in," he said. "You look like you could use something cold." Inside, the house smelled of old wood, leather, and coffee that had been brewed too long. It was tidy but lived in, the kind of place that held memories in the corners. He poured water from a clay jug into a tin cup and handed it to me. The water was cold and I drank like a man starved. "Thank you," I managed between breaths. Eli leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with a half-smile. "Ain't nothin'. Can't just let a stranger drop in the dust." He moved with the easy patience of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. Every small gesture, the way he set the cup down, the way his eyes softened when they met mine, felt unhurried, deliberate. I couldn't help but notice the quiet in the room. Outside, the windmill creaked, and a few horses snorted in the corral. But inside, there was just the hum of still air and something else, something that felt almost like understanding. "Reckon you can rest a while," he said finally. "Got stew on the stove and a spare room if you need to lay down." "I don't want to trouble you," I said softly. He shook his head. "Ain't no trouble. Just me out here. Could use a bit of company." Something in the way he said that tugged at me, a loneliness I recognized all too well. I looked around at the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the single plate drying by the sink. "All right," I said. "Just for a bit." He smiled then, small, genuine, the kind that reached his eyes. "Good. Supper's in an hour. Make yourself at home, Sam. As he stepped outside to tend the horses, I found myself standing in the quiet kitchen, heart beating slow and steady. I didn't know what had drawn me there, maybe kindness, maybe curiosity, but as I looked out the window at his tall figure moving across the fading light, I felt something shift inside me. Something gentle. Something new. Like the start of a story I didn't yet understand. That first evening at Eli's ranch settled in my memory like a dream, quiet, golden, and full of the kind of peace I didn't know I'd been missing. The sun had sunk low behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the corral, and the smell of hay and warm earth filled the air. Eli was out back feeding the horses while I stood near the fence, watching. He moved like a man who had spent his life in rhythm with the land. Every motion was slow but certain. The way he tossed a bale of hay, the way he patted the horse's neck before walking away. The animals seemed to trust him without hesitation, and somehow I did too. "You ride?" he asked when he caught me watching. "Not much," I admitted. My pa had a few mules, but I wasn't allowed near him much. He chuckled, that low, gravelly sound I was already beginning to like. "Well, that's a crime worth fixin'. Every man ought to know how to sit a saddle proper." He led a horse out from the barn, a calm bay mare with soft eyes. "This here's June. Gentle as they come." He showed me how to hold the reins, how to mount, how to sit without stiffening. His hand brushed my shoulder once, steadying me when I lost balance. That single touch sent a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the sun still lingering on the horizon. "You'll get the hang of it," he said. "Takes patience." "I can be patient," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I was talking about riding anymore. By the time the stars started to peek out, we'd finished up the chores. He led the way back to the house, lantern light flickering against the wooden walls. The air smelled faintly of stew, thick, rich, comforting. Inside, he served it up in 2 bowls and nodded for me to sit. The table was small, but it felt like a feast just having someone to share it with. We didn't talk much, just ate quietly. Sometimes his eyes met mine across the table, and neither of us looked away too quickly. When the dishes were cleared, he poured coffee into 2 tin cups and leaned back, sighing. "Used to be, this place was full of folks," he said. "Had 3 hands work in the stables, another in the fields. My brother helped out too before he passed." "I'm sorry," I said softly. He nodded, eyes distant. "Been a long time. I got used to the quiet. Maybe too used to it." The wind creaked through the rafters, and for a while that was all the sound there was. I wanted to say something, anything, to break that sadness that seemed to settle around him like old dust. But words felt small. Instead I said, "You've built something real here." He looked at me then, a spark of surprise crossing his face. "Ain't many notice that." "I notice," I said simply. Something in him softened. He smiled, small and weary, and said, "You got a good heart, Sam. Not many your age do." The way he said it, quiet, genuine, made something inside me ache in a way I couldn't name. Later that night, after the lanterns were out, I stood by the window in the small guest room he'd given me. The land outside stretched dark and endless, the sky full of more stars than I'd ever seen. In the distance I could hear Eli humming, a soft tune, low and rough but comforting. I leaned against the window frame, letting the sound of his voice drift through the house. It felt like the ranch itself was humming with him, the wind, the walls, even the night air. For a long while I just listened. The next morning came early, all light and cold air. Eli was already outside when I stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hand. He handed me another cup without a word. "Mornin'," I said, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Mornin'. You sleep all right?" "Like a rock." He smiled, glancing toward the corral. "Good. Got plenty to do today if you're up for it." "I'm up," I said, maybe too quickly. We spent the day mending fences and clearing brush near the river. He worked steady and sure, rarely stopping to rest. I tried to keep up, but he always finished a little ahead, moving with quiet strength. The sun burned overhead, but he never seemed to mind. "Eli," I said at one point as we sat under a mesquite tree for a break, "don't it get lonely out here?" He was quiet for a while, watching the horizon. "Sometimes," he said finally. "But I reckon I made my peace with it. The land don't ask questions, don't judge. Just is." I nodded, though I couldn't imagine choosing silence over company. Then, as if reading my thoughts, he added, "Still, I miss talking to someone who listens." His gaze found mine then, steady, calm, but full of something deeper. Made my breath catch. I wanted to say something back, something honest, but before I could, he stood and dusted off his jeans. "Come on, daylight's burnin'. We worked until the sky began to bleed into orange and gold. When we finally headed back, I caught him glancing at me a few times, just small looks, quick enough that I might have missed them if I wasn't already watching. That evening we ate dinner on the porch. The cicadas sang and the air was warm and still. Eli leaned back in his chair, eyes on the horizon. "You're a good worker," he said. "Don't see that much anymore. Means a lot coming from you." He smiled at that, slow and real. "Reckon you could stay a while if you wanted. No rush head into town." I looked out over the land, then back at him. The porch light caught in his gray hair, and for a moment he didn't look old at all, just strong and kind and human. "I think I'd like that," I said. He nodded once, almost like he'd expected it. "Good. Ranch could use another heartbeat round here." The sky deepened to violet, and the first stars began to appear. We sat there in silence, two souls who didn't quite know what to call the quiet between us. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was comfort. It was company. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something neither of us dared to name. The sky turned restless that evening, the kind of gray that promised thunder. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain and the sharp scent of earth. By the time Eli and I finished bringing the horses in, the clouds were rolling heavy over the hills like smoke from a dying fire. "You ever see storms like this back east?" he asked, pulling off his gloves. "Not like this," I said. "Back home they'd come and go. Here it feels like the land's holding its breath." He nodded, glancing toward the horizon. "Out here storms ain't visitors. They stay a while." When the first drops fell, we hurried into the house, boots wet and laughter caught in our throats. The air inside felt warm after the chill outside. Eli set a log in the stove, the flames catching quick and bright. "Best stay put till it passes," he said, wiping rain from his hat. "I don't mind," I said quietly, watching him move. His shirt was damp, clinging to his shoulders, and his silver hair looked darker under the lamplight. He caught me looking and smiled, that slow, quiet smile that made me feel like the air had gone thinner. "You're easy company, Sam. Ain't used to that." We ate supper at the table, biscuits and stew again, but I didn't care. It tasted like comfort. The rain came harder, rattling the windows. Every so often, thunder rolled close, making the walls tremble. When I finished my plate, Eli leaned back and said, "You can take the bed tonight. I'll stay in the chair." "That doesn't seem fair," I protested. He waved it off. "Don't worry about me. I've slept worse places." Still, something about the thought didn't sit right. After all he'd done, taking me and feeding me, it felt wrong to let him sleep sitting up. Later, when the lamps were dim and the storm was in full voice, I peeked out of my room. Eli was sitting by the window, hat tipped low, watching the rain. The light flickered across his face, calm, tired, maybe even lonely. "You should get some rest," I said softly. He looked over. "Can't sleep through storms like this. They get in my bones." I hesitated. "You could lie down in here. The bed's big enough." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Now, what would folks say about that?" "Don't think the prairie talks much," I said before I could stop myself. That made him laugh, really laugh, for the first time since I'd met him. It was deep and honest, a sound that filled the room better than the storm ever could. "Well, you got me there," he said. "All right then. Just till the rain lets up." He set his hat on the table and came to the bedside, careful and deliberate. When he sat down, the mattress dipped and I felt the warmth of him beside me. For a while, neither of us said a word. The storm roared outside, but in the quiet between thunderclaps, I could hear his breathing, slow, steady, grounding. I turned slightly, facing the ceiling. "You always live out here alone?" "Long time now," he said. "After my brother passed, I tried keeping hired hands, but folks come and go. Guess I just got used to my own company." "Doesn't it get hard?" He was silent a long time. "Sometimes. But the quiet don't lie. People do." That hit me harder than I expected. I thought of all the times I'd trusted the wrong ones, all the places I'd left because I didn't belong. Maybe that's why I understood him better than I should have. Lightning flashed through the window, lighting his face. His eyes met mine for a second, soft, searching, maybe unsure of what he was looking for. Then darkness again. "You get used to it," he said finally. "But every now and then someone comes along and reminds you what it's like to have company that feels right." I didn't say anything. My throat felt too tight. We lay there a while longer, listening to the storm. My hand rested on the blanket between us, and after a time, I felt his fingers brush against mine, gentle, hesitant. I didn't pull away. His hand stilled, just barely touching, as if asking permission without words. I could feel the warmth through the fabric, faint but real. "Sorry," he murmured. "Didn't mean." It's all right, I said, and my voice came out softer than I meant. You're all right, Eli. He let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. For a while we just stayed like that, two souls caught in a storm, neither sure what tomorrow would bring. When thunder rolled again, closer this time, I flinched. Without thinking, he shifted, his hand covering mine fully now. His touch was steady, reassuring. Storm will pass, he said quietly. Always does. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he saw it. My heart beat faster, not from fear but from the simple truth of being near someone who cared. Outside, rain beat against the roof like 1,000 whispered secrets. Inside, everything felt still, suspended in a moment too fragile to break. I don't know when I drifted off, only that when I woke near dawn the storm had passed. The world outside was washed clean, silver light spreading over the hills. Eli was still beside me, sitting up slightly, hat in his lap, eyes half closed in sleep. For a long while I just watched him, the calm rise and fall of his chest, the way morning softened the lines on his face. He looked peaceful, like a man who hadn't let himself rest in a long time. I wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to thank him for more than just shelter. But I didn't. Some things didn't need to be spoken. When he finally stirred, he smiled faintly. "Mornin', Sam." "Mornin', Eli." He stretched, rubbing the back of his neck. "Reckon we both survived the night." "Barely," I teased. He chuckled, and the sound filled the room again, that low, steady warmth that had started to feel like home. Outside, the land shimmered under the sunrise. The air was fresh, cool, alive. Inside, the quiet between us was different now, not empty but full of something unspoken, gentle and real. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like running. For the first time, I wanted to stay. The morning after the storm, the world felt brand new. The land shimmered under a pale sun, every blade of grass jeweled with dew. The air smelled clean, like rain and soil and second chances. Eli was already outside when I came down, feeding the horses as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. But to me, everything felt different. "Sleep all right?" he asked when he saw me by the fence. I nodded. Didn't expect to after all that thunder. He smiled faintly, eyes glinting under the brim of his hat. "Storms got a way of wearing a man out. But they pass easy enough." I watched him a moment, the way the morning light caught in his hair, the calm in his movements. There was a steadiness about him that drew me in, quiet and sure. I didn't know if it was friendship or something deeper yet, but whatever it was, it settled in my chest and refused to leave. We spent most of that day mending the fence out near the west pasture. The ground was still soft from the rain, and our boots sank into the mud with each step. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of wet sage. Eli worked ahead of me, sleeves rolled, shirt damp with sweat, humming some old tune that the wind carried off into the hills. "Always hummin'," I teased, leaning on my hammer. "You ever forget the words?" He glanced back, smiling. "I remember enough to keep me company." "Company's overrated," I said, half joking, half true. He turned fully then, eyes catching mine. "Not if it's the right kind." I felt my face grow warm. I bent back to my work, pretending not to notice the way his gaze lingered for a moment longer than usual. By noon, the sun had burned through the clouds, and we took shelter under the shade of an old oak near the creek. Eli handed me a canteen and I took a long drink. Our hands brushed when he passed it over. It was nothing, a simple accident, but the touch sent a pulse of something through me that left my breath uneven. He noticed. I knew he did. "You all right?" he asked, voice gentle. "Yeah," I said quickly, though my voice sounded softer than I meant. "Just tired." He studied me a second longer, then nodded. "Work'll do that. Don't push yourself too hard." I looked at him, wanting to say something more, something that would explain the tangle of gratitude and longing that had taken root inside me. But the words didn't come. That evening, the sky went from blue to gold to deep indigo. We sat out on the porch after supper, boots propped on the railing, coffee steaming between us. The crickets had started their chorus and a light wind moved through the fields. Eli sighed, tilting his head back. "Ain't many nights like this," he said. "Feels peaceful," I murmured. "Feels like the world's holding still." I turned to look at him. His face was half in shadow, half in lamplight, the kind of light that softened every hard edge. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with all the words we weren't ready to say. Then he spoke, quiet as the wind. "You ever think about staying, Sam?" The question caught me. "Here?" He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "You work hard. Got a good heart. Don't see much sense in letting you wander off to God knows where. I looked down at my hands. I haven't had a place to stay in a long time. He glanced at me then really looked. Maybe it's time you did. The words settled deep inside me. A simple offer, but it felt like more than that, like trust, like belonging. I couldn't answer right away, afraid I'd say too much. So I just nodded and said softly, I'd like that. He smiled, that quiet, knowing smile again. Then it settled. Later that night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the small bed he'd given me, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the house and the steady sound of crickets outside. My mind kept circling back to his words, to the warmth in his eyes when he said them. After a while I got up and stepped into the hallway. The lamp by the fireplace still burned low, casting soft light across the room. Eli was there, sitting by the hearth, reading an old book, his glasses slipping low on his nose. He looked up when he heard me. Couldn't sleep either, huh? I shook my head. Guess I'm not used to quiet like this. He chuckled softly. Takes time. I sat down across from him. The firelight flickered between us, painting the room in gold and amber. What are you reading? I asked. Old poetry, he said almost sheepishly. My brother used to say I was soft for it. Doesn't seem soft to me, I said. He looked at me for a long moment, really looked, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. You got a kind way of talking, Sam, he said finally. I smiled a little. You make it easy. The quiet stretched again, warm and steady. The fire popped softly. Outside the wind moved through the grass. Then, maybe it was the hour or the way the world felt hushed, but something shifted. He reached across the small table between us and touched the back of my hand. Just a brush of his fingers, light, uncertain. I didn't pull away. His hand stayed there, still and warm, and when I finally looked up, his eyes met mine, tired, kind, and full of something I couldn't quite name. Sam, he said quietly, you tell me if I ever overstep. You're not, I whispered. You never are. His thumb moved, barely a breath of a touch against my skin, and I felt the world slow down. My heart beat too fast, but not from fear. From the simple, beautiful shock of being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. He drew back slowly, almost regretful, and said, I ain't sure what this is. But I know it feels right. I nodded, unable to find words. Yeah, I said finally. It does. The fire burned low and the night deepened around us. Neither of us moved, afraid to break the fragile peace that hung between us. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. It was a beginning, quiet, tender, and real. Days slipped by like soft wind across the grass, steady, gentle, almost unnoticed. Life on the ranch settled into rhythm. Sunrise, chores, long hours beneath the open sky, and quiet evenings by the fire. It wasn't the kind of life most folks dreamed of, but for me, it felt more real than anything I'd known. Eli didn't talk much, but when he did, his words always carried weight. He showed me how to mend a fence proper, how to saddle a horse without spooking it, how to read the weather by the color of the clouds. He taught without preaching, and I listened without question. Sometimes, while we worked side by side, our hands would brush when passing a tool, or our shoulders would bump when we moved in close quarters. Each touch was small, fleeting, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. Careful there, he'd say when I fumbled a nail or lost grip on the reins. I'm trying, I'd laugh. He'd smile, just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. That's all a man can do. Those words, simple as they were, stuck with me. Eli had a way of turning life into something worth holding on to. Most mornings started before dawn. The air was cold enough to sting my hands, and the horizon would just begin to glow. Eli would already be up, coffee in hand, waiting on the porch like he'd been there all night. Morning, Sam, he'd say, voice low, steady. Morning, I'd answer, taking the mug he handed me. We'd sit without talking, watching the first light break over the hills. Sometimes he'd hum under his breath, that same tune I'd first heard the night of the storm. I never asked where it came from. Some things didn't need explaining. It was on one of those mornings that I caught him watching me. Not in a bold way, more like he was trying to memorize something small and precious. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Got a good head on your shoulders, he said quietly. World needs more steady souls. I smiled, though my heart stumbled a little. Don't know about steady. Just trying to keep up. You do more than that, he said. You make this place feel alive again. He turned back toward the sunrise before I could answer, but his words stayed with me through the whole day. By late spring, the ranch began to bloom again. Grass turned green and soft underfoot, and wildflowers painted the fields with color. We rode the fences together, checking for strays, sharing canteens and quiet conversation. One afternoon, while crossing the creek, my horse lost footing. The animal jerked and I nearly went into the water headfirst. Eli was beside me in an instant, grabbing the reins and pulling me steady. "Easy now," he said, voice rough with concern. "You all right?" "Yeah," I breathed, heart racing. "Guess I got careless." He looked me over, eyes sweeping from my boots to my face, making sure I wasn't hurt. "Careless gets you hurt, Sam," he said, softer this time. "Don't make me worry like that." The last words came out low, almost accidental, as if he hadn't meant to let them slip. I smiled faintly. "Didn't know you worried." He met my gaze for half a heartbeat before looking away. "I do." We rode the rest of the way in silence, but the air between us was thick with something unspoken. Evenings were my favorite part of the day. We'd eat simple meals, beans, bread, stew, and sit by the fire afterward. Sometimes Eli would tell stories about his younger days, the cattle drives, the long winters, the friends he'd lost along the way. I listened to every word, watching the firelight dance across his face. "You ever think about leaving?" I asked one night. He chuckled, low and quiet. "And go where?" "The land's got its hold on me. Always has." "You don't ever get tired of being alone?" He was quiet for a long time. "Used to," he said finally. "Not so much lately." My chest tightened at that. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I hadn't realized how lonely I'd been until I wasn't anymore. But instead, I just nodded and stared into the fire, pretending I didn't feel the weight of his words sinking deep. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You got a good laugh, Sam. Been years since this house heard one regular." I smiled, eyes on the fire. "Guess we're fixin' that together?" He looked at me then, and though he didn't say a thing, the warmth in his gaze said enough. As days turned into weeks, our silence became a language of its own. I learned the meaning of his small nods, his rare smiles, the way he'd linger a little longer when he handed me a cup of coffee. He didn't need to say he cared, it was there in every gesture. Sometimes, when I'd come in from the fields late and find him waiting on the porch, he'd offer a small grin and say, "Knew you'd come back." And I always did. Each night, as I lay in the small room that now felt like mine, I'd hear his footsteps in the hall, slow and even, checking the doors, the windows, making sure everything was safe before turning in. It was a quiet comfort knowing he was there. The loneliness that once hung over the ranch began to fade. In its place grew something softer, not love declared but love lived. A quiet, steady affection that didn't need words to be real. One evening, as the sun went down in a blaze of gold, Eli and I stood by the fence, watching the cattle settle. The air was warm, thick with the scent of sage and dust. "Storm comin'?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. Just the wind changin'." The breeze carried the faintest chill and without thinking, he reached out, just a small gesture, and fixed the collar of my shirt where it had folded down. His fingers lingered a second longer than they needed to. "Thanks," I said softly. He only nodded, eyes holding mine for a moment that felt like forever. Then he said, "Let's head in. Got another long day tomorrow." We walked back side by side, quiet but close, the space between us filled with the kind of peace that doesn't ask for more. Though maybe, deep down, we both wanted it anyway. By midsummer, the days stretched long and golden, the air thick with the smell of dry grass and sunlight. The work was hard but steady, and I'd come to love the rhythm of it. The creak of the barn door in the morning, the wind whistling through the wheat at dusk, the way Eli's voice carried across the fields when he called the horses in. We'd fallen into an easy pattern, him and me. We didn't have to talk much anymore. The silence between us was full of understanding. But beneath that peace was something else, something I tried not to name, though it was there every time our eyes met, every time his hand brushed mine, every time he smiled. That quiet smile meant just for me. It was a strange kind of happiness, the kind that scared me because it felt so real. That evening the air felt different, heavy, restless, as if the earth itself was waiting for something to happen. We'd been fixing the fence down by the river, and the sun was sinking low, spilling red light over everything. Eli wiped his brow and leaned on the post, looking out across the water. "You done good today," he said. I laughed softly. "You say that every day." "'Cause it's true every day." He smiled at me, that calm, steady smile that always made my chest ache in the gentlest way. We stood there a while, listening to the river. The air buzzed with crickets, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried into the fading light. "You ever think about what you'll do next?" he asked suddenly. I frowned. "Next?" He nodded. "You're young. Got a whole world waitin'. Don't seem right for you to be stuck out here with an old fool like me." His tone was easy, but there was something underneath, something heavy. "I don't feel stuck," I said. He didn't look at me. "You should. Ain't much here but dust and fences." I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the light catch in his eyes. "There's more than that, Eli." He finally turned, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My heart beat too fast, too loud. I'd been holding this truth inside for weeks, maybe months, afraid to say it, afraid to ruin what we had. But the words were there now, pressing at my throat. "I mean," I started, voice low, "you're here. That's what matters." For a moment he didn't move. Then he let out a small laugh, not mocking, just uncertain. "You don't know what you're saying, boy." "I do." I stepped closer, the space between us narrowing until I could feel the warmth of him. "You think I don't see it? The way you look at me when you think I ain't looking? The way you care more than you'll admit?" He went still, his jaw tightening. "I ain't blind, Eli," I said, softer now. "And I ain't scared of it either." His eyes met mine, sharp, searching, full of a kind of pain that only comes from wanting something you think you can't have. "Sam," he said quietly, "you don't know what this world does to men like that." "I know," I said. "But I also know what it feels like to be seen. And you see me." He took a step back, shaking his head. "It ain't that simple." "Yes, it is." I reached out before I could stop myself, fingers brushing the sleeve of his shirt. "It's only as complicated as we make it." He stared at my hand on his arm, then up at me. His breath hitched just slightly, enough for me to notice. "Sam," he said again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was a question. The air between us felt thick, charged, alive. My heart was hammering, but I didn't back down. "Eli," I whispered, "if you don't want this, if I'm wrong, tell me now." He didn't speak. Didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached up, rough fingers trembling, and touched the side of my face. The gesture was cautious, reverent, as if he was afraid I'd vanish if he wasn't gentle enough. "You're not wrong," he said. I didn't breathe. Didn't dare. "I told myself I wouldn't feel this way again," he went on, voice barely more than a whisper. "It's been years since I let anyone close. Thought that part of me was gone." He looked at me, really looked, and I saw everything in his eyes. The fear, the longing, the tenderness he'd been holding back. "But then you showed up," he said. And I started remembering what it felt like to care. My throat felt tight. "Then stop fighting it." He gave a broken little laugh. "You make it sound easy." Maybe it is. We stood there, the sun dipping low, the whole world wrapped in gold. Then, slowly, like the land itself was holding its breath, he leaned in. It wasn't sudden, wasn't wild. It was careful, deliberate. A man who'd learned to move slow because life had taught him how easily things break. His lips brushed mine, just barely, soft, uncertain, full of all the things we hadn't said. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet, his hand still on my cheek. "Didn't mean to cross no lines," he murmured. "You didn't," I whispered. "You just found one I'd been waiting for." He smiled then, small, tender, real. "Lord help me, Sam, you make me feel young again. Guess that makes two of us." The sun sank completely then, leaving only the glow of twilight around us. We stood there by the river, the air thick with the scent of dust and water and something new, something fragile but alive. For a long time neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say that the silence hadn't already confessed for us. When we finally headed back to the house, we walked side by side, close enough that our shoulders brushed, steady as two hearts learning to move together. That night as I lay in bed, I could still feel the warmth of his hand against my face, the quiet tremble in his touch. The world outside was vast and wild, but inside I felt safe. For the first time in years I didn't dream of running. I dreamed of staying. The days that followed felt softer somehow, like the world itself had loosened its grip. Everything was the same. The fences still needed fixing, the horses still needed tending, but the silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive, humming with something steady and real. Eli didn't speak of that evening by the river. He didn't have to. The truth was there, in the way he looked at me each morning, the quiet way he smiled when I walked into a room. It was there in the small gestures, the shared coffee, the side-by-side work, the evenings on the porch when our hands brushed and neither of us moved away. I'd never known that love could be so quiet. I'd never known that silence could say so much. One evening, near the end of summer, we finished early. The cattle had been moved to the north pasture, and the chores were light. The air was warm, full of the smell of hay and sunlight fading. Eli was sitting on the porch steps, carving something from a piece of wood. "What are you making?" I asked, leaning against the post. He glanced up, smiling faintly. Nothing, yet. Just lettin' it tell me what it wants to be. I chuckled. You talk like the land, patient, stubborn, and half magic. He grinned, the lines around his eyes deepening. You talk like you believe it. Maybe I do. He set the carving aside and looked out at the horizon. Storm season's comin' back soon. Always does. I remember, I said softly. Feels like a lifetime ago. He nodded. You've done a lot of growing since then. So have you, I teased. He gave a low laugh, shaking his head. Don't know about that. Just feel older every morning. Not to me. He looked at me then, really looked, and whatever he saw made his expression soften. You got a kind way of seeing things, Sam. Reckon that's why you fit here. Fit. He nodded. This place needed someone like you. I did too. My throat went tight. For a long time I didn't answer. Then I said, I ain't plannin' on leavin', Eli. He blinked once as if he hadn't expected to hear it said out loud. Then he smiled, slow, genuine, the kind that lit the whole porch brighter than the sunset. I'm glad, he said simply. That night we sat outside after supper, the stars spilling thick across the sky. The air was cool, the kind that carried the promise of autumn. We didn't light the lantern. We didn't need it, the moon gave us enough. Eli leaned back in his chair, boots crossed, eyes on the heavens. Used to sit out here with my brother, he said softly. We'd name stars after all the places we wanted to go. You ever go? He smiled. Nah. Guess I found enough right here. I nodded. I think I have too. He turned to me then, eyes reflecting starlight. You sure about that? You're young, Sam. World's still wide open for you. I shook my head. Don't matter how wide it is. The only part that feels like home's right here. He didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he reached over and laid his hand on mine. It was rough and warm, the way the earth feels after sunlight. Guess the heart don't care much for age, does it? He murmured. I smiled, feeling that familiar ache. Not pain, but the sweet kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. No, Eli. I don't think it does. He squeezed my hand lightly. Then I reckon we'll be just fine. We sat like that, quiet and content as the night settled around us. The wind whispered through the tall grass, the horses shifted in the corral, and the world seemed at peace. Sometimes I think about that first day, how he rode up out of nowhere, dust and sunlight behind him, and offered me a hand. I think about how simple it was, how easily one small kindness can change a whole life. He never said he loved me in words. He didn't have to. He said it every morning when he handed me coffee before sunrise. Every time he fixed a fence post I'd left crooked, humming that same old tune. Every time he looked at me with quiet pride when we rode out together. Love wasn't a thing we declared. It was a thing we lived. One evening, as the sky burned orange and red, I found him standing by the gate, looking out at the horizon like he always did. The wind tugged at his hat, and his shirt rippled like a flag in the breeze. I walked up beside him, close enough that our shoulders brushed. Beautiful night, I said. He nodded. They all are when you've got someone to share it with. I smiled, eyes on the fading sun. Guess that means we're lucky. He turned toward me then, his expression soft. Yeah, he said. Reckon we are. We stood there until the light was gone, the sky turning violet and deep. Then he reached out, slow, certain, and drew me close. Not a kiss this time, not even words. Just his arm around me, his warmth against mine, the quiet rhythm of two hearts at peace. The stars came out one by one, and for the first time, I noticed how endless they really were. Sometimes, when the nights are still, I can hear the echo of that first storm in the distance, the one that brought me to his door. The wind rattles the windows, the rain taps the roof, and I remember that feeling of lying beside him for the first time, the world loud outside but safe within those walls. And I think, maybe storms don't always come to break things. Sometimes they come to bring you home. Under the western sky, the land still breathes in the same slow rhythm. The fences still stand, the horses still graze, and the old cowboy still hums his tune beside me. And as for me, I stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I've finally found the one place where I was always meant to belong.